Hi guys, it's Uncle Scott again. I'm back with another story. This one's a little different. It's probably more like a bedtime story than a picture book. There are some pretty cool pictures, but it's a lot more words. But it's from a great book with stories and legends from all over the world. So I hope you enjoy it. This one's called The King with Dirty Feet, and it comes from India. Once upon a time, there was a king who lived in a hot, dusty village in India. He had everything he wanted and was very happy. But there was one thing that this king hated, and that was bath time. Perhaps he was a little bit like you. This king had not washed for a week. He had not washed for a month. He had not washed for a whole year. He had begun to smell. He smelled underneath his arms, in between his toes, behind his ears, and up his nose. He was the smelliest king there has ever been. His servants were all very polite about it, but nobody liked to be in the same room as him. Until one day, the smell became too much for even the king himself, and he said rather sadly, "I think it is time I had a bath." He walked slowly down to the river. The villagers whispered, "The king's going to have a bath," and they rushed down to the river bank to get the best view. Everyone fell silent when the king stepped into the cool, clear river water. When he called for the royal soap, a huge cheer arose. He washed himself from top to bottom, scrubbed his hair, and brushed his teeth. He played with his toy ducks in his little boat. Then, at last, when he was quite clean, he called for the royal towel and stepped out of the river. When he had finished drying himself, he saw that his feet were covered with dust. "Oh, bother!" he cried. "I forgot to wash them." So he stepped back into the water and soaped them well. But as soon as he stood on dry land, his feet were dirty again. "Oh, my goodness," he said crossly, "I didn't wash them well enough. Bring me a scrubbing brush." The king scrubbed his feet until they shone, but still when he stepped on the ground, they were dirty. This time the king was furious. He shouted for his servant Gabu. Gabu came running and bowed low before the king. "Gabu," boomed the king has had a bath. The king is clean, but the earth is dirty. There is dust everywhere. You must clean the earth so there is no more dust, and my feet stay clean." "Yes, your majesty," replied Gabu. "You have 3 days in which to rid the land of dust, and if you fail, do you know what will happen to you?" asked the king. "No, your majesty." "Zut!" cried the king. "Zut?" said Gabu. "What is zut?" "Zut is the sound of your head being chopped off." Gabu began to cry. "Don't waste time, Gabu. Rid the land of dust at once." The king marched back to his palace. "I must put on my thinking cap," said Gabu, and he put his head in his hands and began to think. When something is dirty, you brush it. He asked the villagers to help him. They took their brushes and brooms, and 1, 2, 3, they all began to sweep. Swish, 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 all day long. The dust rose up and filled the air in a thick, dark cloud. Everyone was coughing and spluttering and bumping into each other. The king choked. "Gabu, where are you?" I asked you to rid the land of dust, not fill the air with it. Gabu, you have 2 more days, and zut!" Oh dear!" cried Gabu, and put his head in his hands and thought. When something is dirty, you wash it. He asked all the villagers to help him. They took their buckets to the well and filled them up to the brim with water, and 1, 2, 3, they all began to pour. Slush, 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 all day long. There was so much water, it spread across the land. It began to rise. Soon it was up to their ankles, their knees, their waists, and then up to their chests. "Swim, everybody!" cried Gabu. The king climbed to the top of the highest mountain, where the water lapped his toes, and he sniffed. "Gabu? Achoo! Where are you?" Gabu came running. "Yes, your majesty." "Gabu, I asked you to rid the land of dust, not turn our village into a swimming pool. You have 1 more day, and zut!" Oh dear, I have run out of ideas," cried Gabu. The water trickled away, and Gabu put his head in his hands and thought. "I could put the king in an iron room with no windows or doors, chinks or cracks. Then no speck of dust could creep in. But I don't think he would like that. Oh, if only I could cover up all the dust with a carpet." Then Gabu had a marvelous idea. "Of course! Why didn't I think of this before? Everyone has a needle and thread and a little piece of leather. Leather is tough. We will cover the land with leather." He asked all the villagers to help him. Needles were threaded and knots were tied, and 1, 2, 3, they all began to sew. Stitch, 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 all day long. Then the huge piece of leather was spread across the land, and it fitted perfectly. It stretched from the school to the well, from the temple to the palace, and all the way down to the river. "We've done it!" cried Gabu. "I will go and tell the king." Gabu knocked on the palace door. "We are ready, your majesty." The king poked his head carefully around the door, not knowing what to expect. Then a little smile twitched at the corners of his mouth. The ground looked clean, very clean indeed. He put 1 foot on the leather, and it was spotless. The king walked across the leather. "This is splendid, comfortable, clean. Well done, Gabu, well done." The king turned to the villagers to thank them. Suddenly, out of the crowd stepped a little old man with a long white beard and a bent back. Everyone had quite forgotten him. He bowed low before the king and spoke in a very quiet voice. "Your Majesty, how will anything be able to grow now that the land is covered in leather? The grass will not be able to push its way through. There will be no vegetables or flowers and no new trees. The animals will be hungry, and there will be nothing for us to eat." Now everyone was listening. "Your Majesty, you know you don't have to cover the land with leather to keep your feet clean. It is really quite simple." The old man took out of his pocket a large pair of scissors. He bent down and began to cut the leather very carefully all around the king's feet. Then he took 2 laces from his pocket and tied each piece of leather to the king's feet. Then he pulled back the leather that covered the earth and said, "Try them, your Majesty." The king looked down at his feet covered in leather and frowned. He had never seen anything like it. He put one foot forward. Very good, he exclaimed. He took another step. This is splendid, comfortable, clean, and the grass can grow. Then the king walked. Then he ran, and then he jumped. Hooray! He cried. I can walk here and here and here. I can walk anywhere, and my feet will always be clean. What was the king wearing on his feet? That's right, he was wearing shoes. They were the first pair of shoes ever to be made, and people have been wearing them ever since. Snip, snap, snout, my story is out.